world of a video game is typically represented to the player by means of graphics and sound. Everybody wants something different from playing video games. There are those who just want to play games to pass the time. There are those who play video games as a means to escape reality, and there are those who play video games to not only be entertained, but to experience worlds, stories and characters that stick with them long past the end credits. The two most prominent ways video games achieve the final point I just made is through their combination and synergy of gameplay, aesthetics and sound design and music. During this video essay, I'm going to outline why I believe that games that focus on combining gameplay with music stand out as the most memorable and iconic, as opposed to games that use them in their simplest of forms. To help support my argument, I'll be focusing on two games that I feel perfected gameplay and music synchronization perfectly: Persona 5 and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. The importance of gameplay. To understand why gameplay and music working together is so important, it's worth looking into what defines good gameplay from bad gameplay. As gameplay is often the main focus and driving force behind why people play video games, it's imperative that developers design games with the audience's attention span in mind. A game can have a great soundtrack, but it won't rise to its full potential without a solid gameplay loop. This can also work the other way around, of course. A game can have amazing gameplay, but a forgettable or non-existent soundtrack, but the effects of this are marginalised in comparison. Persona 5 and Metal Gear Rising both have different but addictive gameplay loops. Metal Gear Rising is a third-person action-adventure game developed by Platinum Games and Kojima Productions. It released in 2013 to overwhelming praise surrounding its gameplay and soundtrack. A dominant branch of video game graphics development has craved improved hardware able to process more and more details. With video games always striving to have better graphics, sometimes developers forego the other important aspects of video game creating to focus on just the one aspect. Metal Gear Rising, at the time it came out, was considered highly complex in graphics. Even after 10 years since its release though, it is still praised for its slicing feature, where you're able to cut almost any object you want in the game with your high frequency blade. Although not directly possible in real life, this explanation behind why you can slice almost anything fits into the lore and narrative of the Metal Gear universe, therefore not breaking the player's immersion. Although the gameplay formula is similar to other Platinum game-led creations like Bayonetta, and a few years later with Nier Automata, it's the way that Metal Gear Rising uses action set pieces, iconic dialogue, and of course music, which makes it stand out above a lot of other action-adventure games that came out around that time. With Persona 5, it's somewhat of a similar story. Persona 5 being the fifth mainline entry in developer Atlus's spin-off on its popular Shin Megami Tensei games. Persona 5 released in 2017 to massive praise on its narrative, gameplay loop and soundtrack. Perspective is of great importance in game design, since it directly shapes how we perceive the game world and how close we can get to its characters and objects, and whether we can even relate to individual characters at all. Even though both the games I'm discussing are third person, they go about the perspective in different ways, with Metal Gear Rising being more action-reaction based. The camera tends to stick closer to its protagonist Raiden and zooms out into cinematic shots during the more over-the-top set pieces to show how powerful and badass the character you're playing as can be. Whereas in Persona 5, the day-to-day and non-battle sections of the game have the camera directly behind the protagonist Joker. Then when you shift into turn-based battle, the camera pulls out as you control each party member and dynamically shifts depending on the type of attack you do. This is more of a stylistic choice, but fits the overall theme of the game and works in favour of the game's style. What also makes these games important and worth mentioning years after their initial releases is how easy it is to go back to them over and over again. With Metal Gear Rising, the game can be completed in around 5 to 6 hours, whereas Persona 5 has a minimal completion time of around 100 hours. But when playing these two games, it's very rare to ever think about how long they are taking to complete. This falls entirely on how addictive and satisfying their general gameplay loops are, whether that be perfecting one of Metal Gear Rising's iconic boss fights and encounters, or whether that be trying to figure out an enemy's weakness in Persona 5. The length of time it takes to complete either of these games also falls under how interwoven both games use narrative and gameplay to expand on their length of play without feeling like you're wasting your time or taking part in in-game events that have no significance or lack any meaning. Inspired by concepts of discourse and storytime and how they create a sense of narrative, Jess Bejeweled proposes that we distinguish between playtime, the real time a player spends playing a game, and event time, the time that passes in the game world during this game. Persona 5 chooses to tell its story around a calendar-based system, where you're not strictly on a time limit, but each day in game brings something new. This can range from narrative advancements which happen on set days, or free time in the game. This then relates both to the in-game character having free time, but also relates back to you as the player being able to choose what your character wants to do. Metal Gear Rising has set levels, akin to more traditional game design. Although there is levels, there's a myriad of collectibles and side stuff to do in the levels. This, alongside with how addictive the gameplay loop can be, and how short the game can be completed in, promotes multiple playthroughs. Video game genre can be understood as the codified usage of particular mechanics and game design patterns to express a range of intended play experiences. Persona 5 and Metal Gear Rising are both games with strict rules and limitations, as presented by the developers when they were making it. But this doesn't mean that there isn't multiple ways to approach the game's content. With Metal Gear Rising, you are able to mix and match combos and weapons that the game has given you, and through trial and error, you're able to mix them up and perform combos and moves that the developers didn't inherently put into the game, but the player, through their own initiative, has found them. In Persona 5's case, as you are able to create and mix over 100 of the monsters that fight with you, all with different kinds of abilities, there is a near infinite amount of combinations that the developers never even thought would work, or never even thought of in general that the player, using their own initiative and mind, has discovered. Combining gameplay with music. Whether we notice it or not, music and sound play a truly important role in game design. Although the general consumer of video games might not bat an eye to audio design outside of in-game dialogue or diegetic sound, I cannot state enough how important music can be in video games. For example, watch this scene from the opening boss battle of Metal Gear Rising without the music.
Stop that plane! Yes! Leave it wide open! Very good.
Although it's a cool looking fight, there isn't much that I'd say is memorable about it, besides the ending scene where Raiden runs up the Metal Gear's legs. Now watch the same scene with the music put back in. As you can clearly see, the music used in this scene presents a dramatic change in how the gamer playing should be feeling throughout the scene. Not only is the song Rules of Nature a metaphorical nod to how strong this type of robot is in other Metal Gear Solid games, but it also shows just how strong Raiden has become since his first appearance in Metal Gear Solid 2. that he is able to single-handedly throw a Metal Gear up into the air, and as Boris the Voice, talking to Raiden over the intercom, so memorably puts it, split it wide open. Now take a listen to some of the music that plays as you walk around Tokyo in Persona 5. This is quite a relaxing song. You're walking around daytime or nighttime Japan, talking to your in-game friends, hanging out, shopping. Then all of a sudden, you get into the battle portion of Persona 5, and you hear this song for the first time. The dramatic tonal shift from low beat jazz to what I can only describe as battle jazz is iconic in its own right. That is the reason these two games stand out to me so much. The way they blend gameplay and music to form this singular experience leaves such a lasting impression as a player, and all of this wouldn't be possible without one or the other. Another example of this which stands out is the final boss cutscene in Metal Gear Rising and the final boss cutscene in Persona 5. As the story is reaching its conclusion in Metal Gear, you're left with this iconic scene.
Save your master. Well, go ahead then. But make no mistake, Fido. When I'm finished with him, you're next.
I was not designed to fear termination.
Huh?
However, Directive 01 is to ensure all data acquired is preserved and passed along. To expire here would violate that directive.
That's a good boy.
However, Raiden came to my aid. I have learned from him. When Samuel fell, data analysis was inconclusive. But that has changed. I have established new parameters now, created my own directives.
You little fuck. Damn much!
I said my sword was a tool of justice. Not used in anger. Not used for vengeance. But now I'm not so sure. And besides, this isn't my sword.
Come on!
Okay. Let's dance.
Then follows one of the best fights I have ever experienced in a video game. As the final boss in Persona 5 looks unbeatable, Joker calls upon his original persona to deliver this iconic scene.
confidence in the people's hopes to you. Put an end to this!
Pillage him. Sataniel! Be gone.
Preposterous! To dare on the people's wishes!
The aesthetics of gameplay and music wouldn't work so well together in Persona and Metal Gear Rising if they were first person. All of the gameplay and music choices work in unison and work so well strictly because the games are third person. In actual experience, we do not usually give much importance to whether the camera is first or third person, or rather we do not give it as much importance as the gut feeling of the actions and general gameplay. I believe this to be the case because I often find first person games don't elicit as much of a reaction out of the player in terms of the combination of music and gameplay. I think this is down to first person games mostly treating the player as the character, whereas third person games usually do a better job of immersing the player in the world and the aesthetics are themes surrounding the product. The way in which Persona and Metal Gear Rising use music and gameplay together can oftentimes be described as a performance, like when Raiden throws the Metal Gear into the air with his bare hands, or when Joker initiates an all-out attack in Persona 5. It's how the music and aesthetic gameplay choices of certain parts of Metal Gear Rising and Persona are directly interchangeable. If it wasn't for the use of music alongside these gameplay pieces, it wouldn't play out the same way and it wouldn't be as memorable. As put by Erica Fisher-Licht, the performance obtains its artistic character, its aesthetics, not because of a work that it would create, but because of the event that takes place. Because in the performance, there is a unique, unrepeatable, usually only partially influenceable and controllable constellation, during which something happens that can only occur once. Conclusion. There is so many examples of music and gameplay working in combination to produce something memorable and unique that I could show, but in reality I would end up showing the entirety of these two games. We, as consumers of video games, need to appreciate how much work and time goes into creating these experiences. Games don't always need to have music and gameplay in tandem, nor should they. As I stated at the start of this video essay, sometimes people just want to play games to tune out reality or to pass the time. But for those who play games with the intent of wanting an unforgettable experience which sticks with them, I cannot recommend Persona 5 and Metal Gear Rising enough. Their unique gameplay, mixed with absolutely iconic soundtracks, is nothing short of an unforgettable experience. It's after these games have ended and the credits have rolled that is the most significant part of the games. This is the time when you then reflect on what you've just played. You then look back on the experience with a wider understanding and knowledge. You take what you experienced outside of the conventions of the game and into your real life. The game is not the experience. The game enables the experience, but it is not the experience.